The idea that people want to be sales reps, well, I suppose there are always some. There will be the outliers of every population group. My experience with myself and the research that Dr. McFarlane and others have done is clear. Look, I didn't want to be representing myself. When I had to, I naively thought that I probably could. It's not true.
Why would anybody represent themselves? And the answer that we have now, very consistently, not only from my own study of self-represented litigants in Canada, but from other studies as well. The New York Task Force on Access to Justice, reporting in 2013, the Ontario Civil Needs Survey, reporting in 2010, among many others. The biggest barrier that the public sees to access to justice is the cost of legal services. In other words, affording the costs of a lawyer to represent them in court. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I have called the affordability puzzle. Because along with the issue of cost, there are many other things that make these self-represented litigants, 21st century consumers of legal services, different to the people that you might have dealt with at an earlier stage in your career. So first of all, the first and overwhelmingly most important issue for the people that I interviewed, and again, this is consistent with other studies, is the cost of legal services. Most Canadians say that they cannot afford access to legal services except on a short-term and emergency basis. The comment on this next slide is typical of what we heard from many people whom we interviewed in our study of self-represented litigants in Canada. This woman said, "It's not that I think that I can do this better than a lawyer. I have no choice. I don't have $350 an hour to pay a lawyer." The second part of the affordability puzzle is the perceived value and the priority placed on paying for legal services. For example, some people felt, "I think I can do this myself. Why would I spend money on a lawyer when I might need that money for something else that is actually more important?" As you can see in the quotes on this slide, something like saving for your child's college education might be valorized over and above paying for the services of a lawyer, especially when people felt, "I'm well educated, I'm intelligent, perhaps I can work this out with the resources that I see out there on the internet." One of the things that surprised me the most about the results of my study were that more than half the people I interviewed had actually begun with a lawyer. In other words, they had gone out and retained counsel because that was what they imagined they should do, but they had very quickly run out of their available resources to continue to pay. In other words, they spent far more quickly than most of them anticipated, and some were somewhat dubious about the value for money that they had received in exchange. Many of the people whom I interviewed had spent $10,000, $20,000, some even $50,000, some even $75,000 on legal services before concluding that they were going to have to continue this alone because they simply couldn't continue to raise the money and justify the amount of payments that they were making. The third and final piece in the affordability puzzle is something that sociologists like to call the disintermediation phenomenon. This is what happens when you live in the age of the World Wide Web and see many opportunities for cutting out the middleman, for reducing the cost to yourself of services because you can do it yourself. This is the same phenomenon that leads to people putting lawn signs out that say "for sale by owner" when they want to sell their property themselves without a realtor, or perhaps going online and investing their own stocks and shares. The same phenomenon is affecting legal services. More and more people are looking at the information that is apparently available free of charge to them on the World Wide Web, and they are preferring to go there, believing that that will give them the same level of service that otherwise they would be paying $350 an hour for. In fact, many of the people whom I interviewed told me that they were seduced in some ways by what looked like the availability of excellent resources on the internet when they began to represent themselves, only to find that this was so much harder, so much more overwhelming, and in fact the resources so much more inadequate than they had first anticipated.
I was a self-represented litigant, and it wasn't because I wanted to be, it wasn't because I was bored. It was something that I was thrown into, and I could not afford a lawyer. And honestly, I didn't know what else was available to me, so I struggled through the whole process of just trying to get through the process. One time I was brought to court, and it was something I had to learn to do. I've lived kind of below the poverty line for the last decade, so even though I was below the poverty line, I couldn't get legal aid. I made too much money. So, what else is there if you can't get legal aid and you can't afford a lawyer? Well, I was stuck in the middle.